Hey, my name's Matt MacKenny.
I'm Jeff Billamek.
We both work for the Home Depot. We wanted to share a story today around some of the stuff we've done around scaling build pipelines at Home Depot. So my hope is you'll get some useful tidbits, ideas, information, and something useful from this. So just real quick, obviously, Home Depot is the world's largest home improvement retailer. We're quite a large company. We're based out of Atlanta, Georgia, with locations across, obviously, US, Mexico, and Canada. If you need some help buying a hammer, nails, and all sorts of stuff, do come and see us online. Got to do the plug, right? So today, we were going to run through how we actually started doing pipeline engineering. So it's always fun taking a journey doing these kind of things because figuring out who you are, what it is, what the problem is, and what the space is. So we wanted to share really three core things. It was really what the idea was, our journey, kind of like the stuff we went through to go through it all, and then share some lessons learned. So my hope and Jeff's hope, both of us together, is you get some good ideas that maybe help you, and we can collaborate to get better as a broader community. So where did we start?
So we used to have a very waterfall regimented process. Like if you wanted to code something, you had to do Java on Tomcat, and you had to use Eclipse. And people didn't really like that. And then as we've gone through the transformation, now pretty much anything goes. We've got all the languages being represented pretty much. We're on PCF.
And classical waterfall methodology, any large enterprise, you usually have a governance body. You've got massive, thick Bible documents, and then someone saying, hey, you need to go deliver this. And then you take the great big thick thing, and then you start coding away. And then they keep looking over your shoulder like, well, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Is it out yet? Is it ready yet? Are we there yet? And so going through that migration and implementing more of an XP lean-based methodology to narrow things down and break things down, understand the problem, work with your users, and then figure out what actually is going to work and focus on code first was a big, hard transformation. Key to that, obviously, is doing smaller batch. Everyone knows that if you do small things, you go faster. There's a wonderful thing called like a penny game. If you haven't played it, go look at it. It's a wonderful little agile game you can do with the team to explain why things are going faster. There's some good studies out there around speed as a result of that. And then, classical BA to product and UX. And then obviously spending a lot of time building those large, thick governance documents, making sure the T's were crossed, the I's were dotted, and building all those things. And moving to a place where we are now actually building the stuff on the fly through stories, whether you're using Gherkin, BDD, or those other frameworks, and actually having, as you're going through the process of building the software to deploy into production, having all that documentation built as you go. So it's the classic same problems that lots of companies have that were pre-bubble, pre-2000, right, from a more a historical perspective. Anything else?
UX is good. If you haven't done UX, give it a shot. If you're doing lots of waterfall, you most likely have review boards or groups of people saying, this is how you must do things, kind of pushing down to you what to do. And part of the transformation is more of a pool-based model where people are enabled and empowered to go do experimentation and try new things. And that's been transformative for us. It's been awesome.
Yeah, so push-pull methodology, I'm just going to work on the premise that everyone has a good understanding around that. Push methodology I usually find is a good example, and I know this is going to get recorded and put out there, right, but my wife might kill me. But anyway, push stuff is like when you tell your kids, hey, have you cleaned your room yet, right? My kids, they need lots of pushing to get their room done. It would be great if they just turn around, Dad, I've got my room clean. And I got these other things done, right? So the push world is very hard to get things done successful and to be optimized from a delivery of work perspective, but a pull model where you're dragging things through is a much more empowering environment. So going from a world where I write the massive requirements documents and I give it to you and say, hey, go deliver them, what time is it, when's it ready? But moving to a place where you're having good empowered teams where they are figuring out what the problem statement is, coming up with a hypothesis, creating experiments, testing those experiments, figuring out what that means, how that plays in, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? And then from there, narrowing down what the real problem is you're trying to fix and solve and what the small unit of thing you can go deliver and get done. So, going from managing large organizations and large teams to having lots of smaller teams empowered, massive change. So dynamically, that's a very big evolution of a culture. So the problem with that, though, is we're going faster. So now we're having to build documentation faster. We're having to go figure out how we go through the governance boards faster. And that creates a healthy tension in any organization as you go through these kind of changes. So someone, somewhere, you have to have someone stand up and say, hey, I'm going to help out. I'm going to go figure this out together. And so myself, Jeff, and a few others at Home Depot started to realize we have a problem and we need to go figure it out. Now, we didn't call it DevOps. We didn't call it pipeline engineering. We didn't call it anything. It was how do we go faster and focus on speed, optimization, and feedback into development and support this lovely conversation of doing development and supporting governance. And is the hard part, as I hope you all appreciate. So when we started off, we figured out there's a bunch of teams figuring out and solving the same problem. Everyone was very focused, I'm assuming most people are familiar with Conway's Law. You build software based upon how your organization is structured. Everyone's very focused on getting the work done and delivering their work based upon your reporting structure. And so Jeff and I found and saw an opportunity where lots of teams were figuring out problems in different ways, but they weren't sharing. So the question then came is like, well, what things could we look to do? And there was really three things I saw when I got it started was there was a fantastic guy who figured out, hey, we can automate the RFC creation. RFCs being request for change. It's a service now, same change management process anywhere. Someone created a nice little lovely API, put in front of it so we could actually automate that thing. Fantastic. Then the next thing was another gentleman, he figured out how to track and get the stories get an ID and tied that to a version to be able to checked in with the code. So we could actually tie a tracker story to a version of code. So that gave some traceability. And then the other piece was we had saw a piece around tying test results as we're building the things. So those three things started to come up with an idea, well, hey, hang on, those three things kind of start to drive the main things we need to get done.
Yeah, I mean, like the ticketing thing like Matt was talking about, it's a tool called ServiceNow. It was a really manual, laborious process. You fill out the form the same way every time to get a change in. There's no value from the developer's perspective to fill that out.
Yeah.
So it's this repetitive process. So this guy named Marcos, he wrote an API layer in Go on top of that. So you can now, through your automation, automatically generate these change requests for production changes. And then the same thing with the GitHub version. Sometimes PMs are like, well, you know, which of these stories are in production or what version of the story's in? We use Pivotal Tracker, so we wrote some automation to associate a version in GitHub release to Pivotal Tracker stories by creating labels.
So in gathering these individuals together, we got into a room, sat down, and then we all started to talk about, well, how do we want to solve this? So with all good things, you have to have, first understand what the problem is, why you're doing it, and then align on a vision, right? So I've heard a lot around over this, people talking about CI/CD. I have 3 definitions I use for continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. It's important to know what those are. Continuous integration, depending if you're a James Shaw fan or a Martin Fowler fan, they have different ways of solving for it, right? But for me, it's more about a group of developers creating a build on a build server. That's CI. Continuous delivery is then taking that, running all the way up to the point right before production, before a product manager or someone clicks go. And then continuous deployment is then linking all these things together from a point of a code commit and having systemic tests and automation occurring all the way through in building ephemeral servers, all the way through up to, and then running to do your blue-green, we used to call it cell 1, cell 2, when we built the same capabilities back about 7, 8 years ago in Canary deploys, and A/B testing, all those other things in production to then systematically say, hey, is it good or not? So those are the definitions we landed on. But that was our aha moment. So in the room, we started to try and align on some ground rules. And this was important as a team. If you've got any team which you're aligned on a vision, a plan, and a why, and a problem statement, you've got to really agree on what it is. And we pretty much did the cliche thing from, if you pick any military environment, you leave your badge on the door, and there's no titles. We're all in the same room to solve the same problem. So anybody in the room from any group in any area could share and have thoughts and share what they were thinking. And we didn't dictate. We became very opinionated about not having an opinion. Very opposite, right? Because we were in an environment where every development team had an opinion already. So for us to be able to work with development teams, it wasn't about us having an opinion, it's about us listening and about us thinking through and aligning on what matters. So we had an opinion to be not opinionated, and make sure we're trying to support the teams by doing something that makes more sense for a broader team and a community. So that was a fun one, because people would come in and they'll be like, well, are you going to tell us how to do this thing? And we're like, no.
Yeah, you're going to help us figure it out.
Right.
Yeah,
It's kind of entertaining. I don't know if you have a good example of that one you want to share. Probably on the spot right now.
Yeah. I mean, some people said, hey, where's the documentation so I can follow this recipe to have CI? And at the very beginning, that really wasn't a thing. It was more, how can we come up with the normalization pattern that people can follow to have a good set of CI practices that'll get them where they want to be and accomplish all of the checks they need to do.
I think they were looking for a silver bullet.
Yeah.
They were chasing a thing. Go give me a tool, let me go implement the tool, and then I'm done, then I move out of the way and move on to the next problem. But that gets you away from the actual practices and a culture you're trying to grow around. How is good, and what does good look like? And then know that whatever tool you're using can change. And you have to change a tool. Credit to Lyle and James Marr and others out there. I think they're in the audience. They've been very good and positive in helping us make change in the concourse stack to support the learnings we've had as we've gone through to figure things out.
Yeah, I mean, so we used to have like this enterprise Jenkins server that everyone had to use to do builds. And some groups wanted certain plugins or certain changes made, but the group couldn't support that, so people were frustrated, like, well, I can't do what I need to do on this enterprise Jenkins. So some groups then spun up their own Jenkins servers, which became special snowflakes, because as you know, if you use Jenkins, or at least before the Jenkins pipelines, you had to do a whole lot of work and cultivation of these servers to make them do what you want for your stuff. And if the server goes away, it's a huge pain in the butt to get it going again. So around that time, Concourse had a release where they enabled proxy server support, which was important to us because we have lots of firewalls. So with that, we also had a group that gave us the capability to get these ephemeral VM servers that you have full root access. It's basically, we call it server on demand. It was really, really important because it allowed developers to then get a server, install Concourse on it for their team, and then point their Concourse server to their repos and do everything on their own without going through a bunch of forms and paperwork. Because prior to this, to get a server was a big deal. You had to fill out all these forms, you had to go to meetings, you had to pay a lot of money, and now it was no big deal. It was super easy.
How quickly can we set up a Concourse server now?
We have a GUI in front of it, and you fill out some information like what password do you want and like what's your OAuth information and all that. But basically within about 8 minutes, a team will have a Concourse server up and running that they can do fly set pipeline to. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a much better environment, much more focused on having development teams focus on delivering and working on code to solve a problem that you want to go test versus dealing with orchestration of tickets and information to be able to get your work done. So it's definitely a good solve because the challenge always is rather than having I have to have this or this, it's how can you get those and conversations? And being an advocate for that and driving that conversation makes a big difference in the productivity of an organization as a whole.
And also around this time, we had started adopting Slack, and even though we were having these really great guild sessions where all the different people that are interested in doing CI, we get together and talk through these things, we started really, really jumping into Slack. And so for those that were remote or weren't part of the sessions or whatever, it made it very easy to share information, share examples, and talk through the things. That if we didn't have Slack, that would have been so much harder. So, or any, I guess, communication tool. So communication and info sharing is key, absolutely.
In a typical session that we would have on a monthly cadence, depending on how you want to work and run yours, when you're aligning with lots of different groups with different opinions, having a session where you do the usual, working with Pivotal Labs, the typical MO, the one I'm used to doing is basically run through stickies, come up with ideas, come up with things that you want to get out of a session. We usually would time base it to say, hey, we've got about 6 hours as a whole we're going to run through, but just time base it, write them out, get everyone to write it out, stick them up on a board, then look at them, have everybody read them, merge them all up. Same good product stuff anybody doing product management here would know about, right? You're trying to get a good synthesis and affinity around what it is. I typically would just circle the topics, assign an owner in the room, and then from there, then you go off and start working on the problem and have those people then read out to everybody else so everyone shares the same learnings. We did find as we worked through this and got a few example pipelines going that even in that team, we, not surprisingly, had opinions that were different. We had some teams that still wanted to use some elements of a Jenkins, some teams are using, predominantly what we built was concourse-based, but we worked through and navigated those conversations to realize that there was better leverage on aligning around a common good path to getting to production and having more of a paved road around that to then support the ability for teams to get going.
Yeah, so I mean, for teams that don't want to figure it out on their own, they can look at these example pipelines where we go through all the steps that are necessary to make everybody happy, and then they can just basically just, search and replace the example repo with their own, and they're pretty much good to go.
So after about a year, we started to have good examples. We had good teams out there. So we started with a very small team with all good transformations, right? You start with a small team and then you just gradually divide and build. And so we had good examples now running in different VP portfolios from a software development perspective. So they could actually start, actually saying, hey, you can actually do this. You can actually start deploying multiple times in a day, which is fantastic. So, to keep this going, at least on my part, I had to make sure I got discrete support from each of the managers, because obviously in any good organization, everybody wants everyone to be efficient and very much delivering value all the time, which our team was, just in a slight different way to enable more value creation. So I spent a lot of time working with the respective managers and leaders to make sure that individuals had a certain amount of slack time, because the effort around doing this pays dividends overall. The ability to incrementally deliver and incrementally get capabilities out there actually drives more value over the time. The same way paying off a mortgage, if you do it incrementally, you'll find that the mortgage rate goes down. If you deliver value as you're going faster, you actually get more benefit for that over a long term at scale. So we curated the information we had and went around and became advocates internally. Sat down with teams. I know, Jeff, you spent a lot of time with Andrew and Marcos and various other people just driving the conversation.
Yeah, lots of pairing, helping teams that got stuck with their pipelines, helping teach them things. I don't know if any of the Stark and Wayne guys are in here, but the Stark and Wayne concourse tutorials are awesome. It helped a lot of people get up to speed on it, so that was good.
But you've got to generate some energy around it. So individuals who are doing great things, you've got to celebrate their successes and make sure that they know and make sure they meet everyone that they're influencing and changing. And I think that was very helpful to get more of a good energy and a good drive behind it. There was no one person owning this. There was a group of us working together to solve the same problem and the same challenges. We're not, by no means done. We've got to a certain point right now where we've enabled continuous delivery as a model, so you can deploy multiple times in a day. There's still more work to go do. That's the fun things around this, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of the common things that we come up with, we have a CI/CD GitHub org, internal GitHub, and we allow anybody that wants to contribute or make a change just do a pull request and implement it that way, instead of people going off in their own little silos and figuring out how to do some of the things by themselves and not sharing back. So really fostering that open source style within our company using GitHub helped a whole bunch as well.
A good example around that was, if you go work with, most developers, they have great ideas. We're going to go figure it out by ourselves, right? Smart ones will go out there and go find out what's occurring out there and then maybe re-leverage it. But what we found was that certain teams would have built their own things that supported their example and how they worked and run. But then by building this tooling and so on, they didn't factor in all these other changes that were occurring. And so by us continuing to share a working model of what's current, they found that their versions came behind. So they started to reduce their time in building snowflakes and focused on solving with the same solution. And then realizing in solving with the same solution, it wasn't about us saying, hey, you've got to do it this way. It was about enabling them to say, hey, no, you can do a pull, you can change it, bring it back, just make sure you support all your other teammates. And they're on multiple floors in different places, and make sure it's supporting everybody. And being more curating to help and assist others versus I've got what I need and I'm done. And that change, I think, was probably one of the big things that made it quite a success.
And then also around this time, there were some concerns about, I'm using Concourse, but the data is stored in the Concourse database unencrypted. And lo and behold, there was a new release of Concourse and allowed encryption of the data, which was really great. So we implemented that, and then if you use Concourse and you're using secrets, if you typically will have a YAML file that has all the secrets on there, and people were just kind of having those lay around on a directory on their computer. But then we integrated with Vault. I know there's CredHub as well, but any of those two solutions are really good because it allows you to move all your credentials outside of the environment where the developers don't need to really see them or know about them. That helps a bunch. And then also to help support automation, we started scripting the creation of concourse servers. And so we're getting close to the point where we can actually have a pipeline that'll spin up a new ephemeral server and load the existing pipelines on it, which is really nice because it'll require basically no manual intervention at that point. You'll just have a special 60-day job or whatever that'll build your new server for you.
Yeah. And the fun thing about having a good pipeline is all those repetitive tasks you're doing repeatedly. If you can build the integration, it becomes much more of a environment where you just get the information back. And the real question is, why am I waiting so long to get my information back? Yeah. That's becoming more of a question nowadays, I think. So I wish someone gave me this slide a long time ago. It probably would have helped. In a publicly traded company, and these are just, I'm throwing them out there, if you're in an environment and an organization that's publicly traded, there are some things you've got to consider to enable a broader company to convert, not just outside of learning agile practices, what it means and how it's organized, but you've got to change maybe some of the financial controls and how you actually track things from a SARBO perspective. It's work to go do because you have to get alignment up and down your chain. But the models, at least I'm sharing here, that you might want to consider for your environment in your context. Finance controls, they're typically going to want to know, like, tracking all actuals of labor for an asset. I'm sounding like a finance guy now, aren't I? So the code that you drop out into production, tracking how much time and labor that individuals put into getting it out there. That's how they're interested around tracking those monies and those dollars. There's another approach where you can track the actual time of it. You could also do a forecasting approach around it all, but it's one to tie very closely with your finance department to make sure it's a neutral impact overall and do lots of tests to figure out what works. But that will then enable you to then not be in a position where you are always constrained by more broader organizational controls because you're now realigning your controls and you're able to do software development, right? Remember that and or conversation? Same with Sarbanes-Oxley. You get to pick your controls in a company. So you've got to move away from a waterfall tollgate process. It does require alignment across lots of stakeholders in an organization, but those conversations are very good in educating on the meanings and the whys and the hows of going faster, doing small, quicker, and more often is actually beneficial to you as a company. And that helps change the broader organizational culture as well. So we landed on, and credit to David Mayfield, he came up with the idea around doing more of a change management process, and Dirk Wright in our organization. And then tying to all the things we did around pipelines, it kind of like tied together very nicely. So that helps you then focus more on a risk-based model you'll find is more common out there nowadays to then manage those from a controls perspective. So yeah, maybe not a topic for everyone here, but if you hear a conversation and you hear someone and a leader in a space, these are some ideas I wish I had a few years ago. So hopefully that's useful. And we've got lots more lessons we can share here. So these are in no specific order. I don't know if you want to jump on one first, Jeff.
Like I was saying earlier, or touching on earlier, it's important not to have, like, in my opinion, not to have like a central group that kind of controls how you do CI. I think it's really important to bring in the developers that are going to be using it so they feel more empowered and more included. Instead of, like we showed earlier, the guy shouting from the mountaintop, instead of just saying, hey, this is how you must do things, allow everybody to be part of the conversation. I think it'll go a lot smoother and you won't have people go off and build their own little things.
And if you find that somebody doesn't want to work or doesn't want to talk, go somewhere to someone who'll listen. Find that person, go work with them. And then pretty soon you'll get enough groundswell of individuals wanting to do something that others then follow. There's a really good example around Simon Sinek, like The Why, a really good YouTube video out there, basically saying 10% of the people are going to take the new thing and eventually you'll work all the way down to the people that the only reason why they're not buying an analog phone is they can't get it anymore, so they had to go buy an iPhone because they're not necessarily going to adopt. So you've got to work your way through your organization and make sure you're working with the adopters to get those change occurring.
Also, kind of like I touched on before too, what really worked for us was it's difficult for us to just spin up VMs like in a cloud provider like GCP or whatever to run our concourse servers on, because a lot of what we do is within our firewall and it's very difficult to have that communication coming from the outside. So in our model, our infrastructure group created this thing where, like I mentioned earlier, these server-on-demand servers, where you get a free server for 60 days, and it goes away after 60 days, and you can spin up a new one. So that really ties in well with Concourse, since Concourse it by definition is so ephemeral with the way how you do the pipelines and all that. That was a game changer for us, because before that, it would have been a really high barrier to entry for people to get their own servers. And we did not want to go back to the enterprise like CI server model where everyone had to kind of play in the same space.
And as you're going through it, you've got to be sensitive to each development team. There's a lot of healthy debates if you're in a development team. Obviously, we all know that, right? About versioning, about how you want to work, how you want to operate, and how you want to run. So whatever you do, make sure you don't be so prescriptive on that, because that's a very demanding role to do that across large groups and large teams. Rather, just make sure you've got some vehicle where, hey, as long as you use this API, which you can put in whatever versioning you want, we don't mind. Just make sure if you don't have that type of versioning that you want to use, can you just add it and just do a pull request on that and add that? Then it's less driving a single way for a team to run and operate. So I think we've got like around 300 plus concourse servers up and running nowadays.
Yeah, concourse is definitely the biggest deployment we have, although we have some teams that are using drone and some that are using Jenkins still. Some people have been playing with the Jenkins declarative pipelines. And so I think it's important not to prescribe, like Matt was saying, you must use this thing, but to give people the freedom and flexibility. Although I think what we find in that model is the best thing will win out as far as what people are actually using.
And one of the things we learned through all of this was don't regiment a single pipeline. Instead, allow each team to describe how they want it to run. Because there's lots of opinions around whether you do feature when you merge back into master, is it post-production or up to, and so on. But instead, versus focus on the actual common repositories of where you actually store the information, like your GitHub, your tracker, your change record system, and so on, and build some capability to integrate with those things. And then have more your management to occur around those respective common repositories. That then supports any governance needs and requirements, and also allows flexibility for each development team. And that's the fun part around integrating these two worlds. So we did a demo, maybe in a internal meeting, which was, we had somebody in the session that got tweeted out, and this one's to my personal excitement. So this is the chat that I ended up starting to see. So there's a guy called Mark, really cool guy. He sat there and he was like, hey, I just saw an engineer and a product manager at Home Depot. They just, they deployed from a repo to prod live on stage. And then there were some replies from people out in the industry. So lots of apps should flow through the pipe that way. What's the big deal, right? If you're in a private company, yeah, what is the big deal? Well, the big deal is in a publicly traded company, working through all those governance and controls, it's not an easy thing. And working through all those teams to solve it, to be able to go build in a more rapid, faster way, is not an easy thing. So that was a good conversation that began there. And then internally, Tony McCulley, Cody Stamps, awesome guy. Cody's like, hey, that was me. He was the guy who actually pressed the button. And it went to 1,000 stores, like live, when they clicked the button in the space of like 15 minutes. And then this, my personal joy, Jez Humble. He said this is the right way to do governance in a CD context. So I've read a lot of his material, respect the guy. So that to me was, that's the icing on the cake. So thank you very much.